are recording now, so don't say anything. You don't want to be heard by all of our followers on YouTube. Um, uh, we talked last class about the Holy Trinity. What does the Orthodox Church believe about God? And first, we defined a little bit, insofar as we could, what God is. And we said God is the absolute. God is the foundation of reality. So we said that everything within reality, most of what we experience is contingent. This cup is contingent. It began to exist at one point. It will probably go out of existence at another point, and the rest of existence doesn't depend on this cup's being or non-being. The same is true of you, of me. I came into existence at a certain point, and at least as a physical thing, I will die and rot in the ground at some point, and the world will keep on turning. Sad but true. Most things in the world are contingent. They come and they go. However, we said there's something at the foundation of reality that doesn't change, right? When you drop an object that has mass towards another object that has mass, there's always an attraction there. You rub two sticks together, and under the right conditions, it always produces fire. It never produces locusts or any other kind of substance. There's something at the foundation of reality that is utterly unchanging, and we call that the absolute. So the number 2 plus 2 always equals 4. It never equals 5. It will never equal 3. There's something at the bottom of reality that doesn't change, and that's what we say is God, or an extension of God. We wouldn't say maybe the laws of physics are God, but we'd say they're an extension of God's will, and which is permanent and unchanging. When something falls to the ground, it's because God wills that. God is what's at the bottom of all of that. Regardless of what's in between us and God. And so we said that the absolute, the foundation of all of the bottom of all reality, is personal. Is one God in three persons. And we said because we believe that this is, and if you guys want to learn more about what is the Holy Trinity, I'll put that on YouTube soon. We recorded it last week. But suffice it to say that God is personal. God is one God in three persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and that has implications for the rest of reality. So go back and watch the previous lesson if you want to know more about that. Today, so we talked about what is the foundation of reality. Now we're going to talk about, the reality in which we live, which we refer to as creation. So we already talked about what's at the bottom of creation. Now, but what is the nature of creation itself? And we're doing it from Clark Carlton's book, The Faith, an Orthodox Catechism. It's a great primer. Of course, there are a lot of good Orthodox catechetical primers out there, but this is the one we use. So we're gonna talk about the world God created and our place in it. So a quick little summary. I like he always gives us at the beginning of each chapter. Man was. It's not in your packet. So your packet is just related to this, but it's not. What I'm about to read is not in your packet. Man was created in the image of God in order to live in perfect communion of love with God, with his fellow men, and with the physical world. That's it. That's the summary of what we're going to talk about today. It's good. But what is creation? So we're going to talk about, go back to the first book of the Bible, which is the book of Genesis. That's the story of the creation of the world and everything in it, which Christians believe to be a true description of the creation of the world. So Genesis, it starts chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And it's just a story about how all of our universe came into being. Now, as everyone's aware, it's people who are into what's described in Genesis is at odds with the modern scientific worldview, and we're going to get into that maybe a little later in the lesson. But suffice it to say that it's true. It's a true statement to say that Genesis is not primarily concerned with the mechanics of what's going on. So it's not really concerned with which elements were formed when and how. Genesis is primarily concerned with the meaning of the world's existence. God brought it out into being out of nothing, and this was in contrast to a lot of the other creation stories that were swirling around the ancient Near East, contemporary with the book of Genesis. So like the Epic of Gilgamesh. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the world is created almost by accident. In the Enuma Elish of, maybe not the Gilgamesh, Enuma Elish.
That is it.
Oh, it's the same thing? Okay.
Yeah, it's the same thing.
All right, thank you.
Gilgamesh is the hero.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I'm glad to have you here. But it basically, in that story, which is one of the many stories circulating in the ancient Near East, the world and human beings are created almost as a sort of cosmic accident. As the sort of refuse that pops off after a great battle between the gods. And so the world, so human beings are very much not at the center of the world. Human beings don't exist for any particular reason, and the whole locus of the action is among the gods in the heavens and their interactions. By contrast, the book of Genesis presents a very different vision. In this, there's only one God, and He creates everything in an orderly way. So even though the world is originally without form and void, and there's a sort of chaos to reality when God first creates it, He imposes order on it. He says, let there be light, then there's light, and then there's evening and morning, the first day. He imposes order on the chaos. He separates the waters from the waters. He brings the dry land out of the waters. And so he builds the world in an orderly, sequential way. So the meaning of Genesis is, first of all, that God created the world out of nothing. There's one God. He created the world intentionally, not sort of by accident, and He created it with this sort of care and order, and He did not create it out of a sort of pre-existent material. That's an important thing, because if all of matter pre-existed along with God, then matter is kind of equal to God, right? Because matter exists independently. It isn't created by anyone. It lasts forever. I mean, it's got some of the characteristics that belong properly to God alone. Of course, what's very interesting is now even the modern scientific worldview accepts the fact that, yes, matter begins to exist and comes out of existence. Matter is not eternal and self-existent. So it's very interesting. That our view is sort of validated in that way. But God created the world out of nothing. He's the one supreme reality. There's no co-equal reality alongside Him. In contrast, to the materialists who even back in the time of the ancient Greeks said that matter was all there was, or matter was the foundation of all existence. Also in contrast to the dualists, like the Zoroastrians of Persia, who said there were two gods, a good one and a bad one. In this story, there's only one God, and He's supreme, and He's calling all the shots. There's no one who chimes in and has any kind of opposition to Him, at least not in the first two chapters. Yes?
All the creation stories, all of them, are an attempt by human beings to understand how the world is as it is, and how they're in it, and what is their place in it. All creation stories attempt to answer that question within terms that human beings can understand.
Right.
And,
right.
The diversity in terms of that thinking is mind-blowing.
Right.
This Eli-Anush, the Babylonian myth, the gods, Enkidu, and I forget who the other one is off the top of my head now, because I've been a while since I looked at it. They were sitting around in their, up there in their heavenly abode, and they were saying, "We're hungry, we want to eat. Well, we'll go to work." "Oh, I don't want to go to work." Let's make some creatures who will go to work for us, and they'll bring us sacrifices and take care of us, so we don't have, kind of walking robots, if you would, 5,000 years ago. And so human beings were created for a purpose. They were created to be slaves to the gods.
Interesting.
The Genesis story, God does not create man to be a slave.
Right.
Very different.
So that's a really good point, and thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, there are a lot of different creation stories, just like there are a lot of understandings about what the absolute is or what God is. And just like what you believe about the absolute will affect how you approach all of reality, right? If you believe that there's a creator, not a creator, you'll have a different way of living depending on which one you believe. The same thing, if you believe that human beings were created for a purpose, or what purpose for which they were created, that's going to lead to two very different lifestyles. So these things, they seem abstract, they seem remote, they seem far away, but they're incredibly relevant to the sort of shaping of your mind and your understanding of the world and your place with it. And that's what I've tried to express a little bit in the Divine Liturgy today, but so much of what we experience in the Orthodox Church is about shaping our mind in such a way that we can come to a proper knowledge of God. So the Divine Liturgy, the reason you're in the liturgy to a certain degree is, according to St. Theophan the Recluse, is you're supposed to let yourself just be open to it and be affected by what's going on. And the more you attend liturgy and the more you let yourself be affected, the more your mind will be shaped by the prayers, by the teachings, by the readings, and that's the purpose of the Divine Liturgy, to make you. So these stories we tell, they have relevance. So number one, God created the world out of nothing. And two, man has a unique place in the world as God's image bearer. Man has a unique place in the world as God's image bearer. So God not only created human beings, according to the book of Genesis, intentionally, not by accident, and not as sort of a secondary sort of slave-like role, as Tom says, but human beings are the pinnacle and crown of creation. Human beings are the last thing God creates, and they're the most special thing he creates. Why? Because he imparts to them his image. It's the only thing in all of creation about which God says, let us make man in my image. What does it mean to be in God's image? It means that man is going to be like God in some reasonable way. You can only call something an image of someone if it resembles it, right? If a picture that's supposed to be of me doesn't look like me at all, I wouldn't really say it's a picture of me, right? It's because it has nothing to do with me. An image can only be an image of something if it has some meaningful resemblance. So the fact that Genesis says human beings are in the image and likeness of God has huge significance because it means human beings are like God in some meaningful sense. And of course, yes.
Oh, I was gonna. Do you think it's like wrong for humans to like try to replicate like consciousness with like artificial intelligence? Like I'm thinking like
Right.
the Tower of Babel, like that kind of image in like a modern day sense. Like, do you think that's wrong?
That's a really interesting question, and it's worth discussing. The short answer is I do not think, and I think there's good reason to believe human beings will never replicate consciousness. And that I think the leading AI people, as much as there's a lot of bluster about AI is going to end the world, it seems like candidly I'm told most people kind of recognize that actually we've run into some hard limits, and it doesn't seem it's not clear how we're going to surpass them. So I don't think artificial intelligence is actually intelligence. I think it apes intelligence, and I don't believe artificial general intelligence will ever happen. People can try.
Yeah, just like the idea of like trying to do that.
Trying,
like,
yeah. Oh, is that like a is that like a
the
blasphemy?
Tower
Like
of
that you're,
Babel, where they're like trying to reach the heavens.
I don't know.
like-
Maybe we'll see if we get like nuked or whatever from heaven.
I can't remember, somebody said the other day about AI that yes, it's true, most repetitive type of jobs, cashiers are going to be the first to go, and a lot of other, where it's da 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 da. But anything that requires a creative response, that there is no solution that automatically fits. You got to work it all out.
Right.
That they can't. Their AI will never be Leonardo da Vinci or my favorite Boccherini. No one will ever make music like that from a computer. It just doesn't happen, and it's never going to happen.
So that's what the critics of the artificial general intelligence view generally say is that AI will never be generally creative. It can because it's a machine. It can never be more than the sum of its inputs. To genuine creativity requires sort of flash of genius. It requires something novel coming into being, and no one really knows how that happens. By the way, no one really knows how human beings come up with something that has never been come up with before. It's really interesting, not just in arts but in the sciences and stuff.
How does a guy like Mozart live? This guy. There was no reason that this guy should ever be who he was.
Yeah.
Salieri says, his gifts come from somewhere else.
Yeah. Genius is a really interesting phenomenon, and it's like genuine genius. Anyway, were you going to say something?
Nah,
Okay. But notice that these two main points, God created the world out of nothing, and man is a unique place in the world as God image bearer, refutes two ideas right off the bat. The one has already said, refutes the idea that the world is self-existent and eternal. And that's important because it means that the world cannot be worshipped. You cannot and should not worship nature because nature did not come into being on its own. It does not exist from before all time. It's not worthy of worship. It is something created. And number two is that man is not self-existent and eternal. So it's an important bit of humility. We're not immortal by nature, and we're never going to achieve immortality of our own means. We did not create ourselves, but we have to submit ourselves to something that's above us. And we must know what we are and where we stand in order to develop spiritually, right? I mean, if you want to become a properly formed human being, if you want to become a human being in the fullest sense of the word, if you want to live human life properly, you have to know what a human being is. Is a human being just a Darwinian survival machine? Is a human being a creature that just came into being because it was the most optimized for surviving on the African savanna 200,000 years ago. Then the best thing you're going to learn to do is to learn how to compete, to learn to have as many babies as possible. To learn if that's what a human being is, that's where you need survival. If human being is created in the image of God, now I'm not saying no evolution happened in human history. Of course, some amount certainly did. But about the core origin of human beings. The core origin of human beings, if human beings are in the image and likeness of God, that's going to lead to a radically different life. What you need for your fulfillment, what you need to achieve your purpose and your destiny is going to be very different than if you're just a creature that's put together for the survival of your genes. You understand? So we need to know what we are. We need to seek out self-knowledge. Socrates was very famous for saying, know yourself. But the fathers of the church, I can't think even of a specific one, but very many of the fathers talk about coming to self-knowledge. Who are you really? What are you actually like? It's very important for our spiritual growth. And this story of Genesis teaches us two things. On the one hand, we are nothing. On the one hand, we are nothing. We did not pre-exist. We came from non-being. And it's kind of a dizzying thing to contemplate for too much. There's been a really long period of time where you didn't even exist. And you didn't even know about it. And that kind of horrifies me, because I could have just kept not existing. And I thank God every day for my existence. And I wouldn't have known it either. I wouldn't have been able to complain, because I would have just been oblivion, darkness, whatever. And that's very scary to think of. But it means, in that sense, I was not sovereign. I was not in control at all. I did not choose to come into being. But my existence is a gift. It was just handed to me from God. So on the one hand, we are nothing, and on the other hand, we are in God's image. There's something incredible. On the one hand, and these are really radical poles for me to tell you. On the one hand, you're nothing. On the other hand, you're the most special thing. You're the most supremely special thing in the world. You have a rational soul. So when we say we are in the image of likeness of God, in the likeness of God, the question is, well, in what way are we in God's image? We resemble God in some way, but what way? I mean, obviously, we are not like God in that we are not all powerful. We are not eternally existent, so on and so forth. So in what way are we in the image of God? And the fathers come up with actually a bunch of different responses. Different fathers say different things, and I think all of this is all of the answers they come up with are correct in their own way. We resemble God in a lot of different ways, and I think it's this holistic picture of the image of God that we should look at. We shouldn't just pick out one thing and say, oh, that's our being made in the image of God, but we should look at the whole picture. So one of the first things is that we have rational souls. All right, this is what separates us. And even according to modern scientific research, we have rational souls. What is a rational soul? It's the capacity for abstract thought. All right, we can think, we can imagine things, we can think of things that are not there, we can think of the future, we can think of counterfactuals, things that didn't actually happen. What if I stayed home and I closed the church and no one came today? I can imagine that. It's not what happened, but this capacity for abstract thought and reasoning. We can do math. We can think of high-minded concepts like freedom and justice and so on and so forth. This is a capacity that no animal has, that no animal that exists currently seems to even have close to the capacity to have. That is one thing we have that makes God like us. That makes us like God. God also, we said, is a person. What does it mean that say is a person? It means he thinks, he feels, he decides. So he doesn't think and feel the way we do, but he does think and feel in a meaningful sense. He also, another thing we have that puts us in the image and likeness of God is that we have free will and moral agency. I can choose to do things or not to do things. I could have chosen to cancel church today and just close the door, even for no good reason, stay home and watch TV on my couch. People might have been mad at me, but I could have done it. All of us believe that I could have done it. I believe I could have done it. Unless you're like a super hard determinist and you said, no, it was slated, it was destiny by the atoms in your brain. But anyway, but we have free will and moral agency. That's the other thing about God. God is perfectly free. God is perfectly free, and he could have chosen to create. He could have chosen not to create. There's nothing about God or the world that forced God to create the world. It was entirely his decision. Every major thing God ever did, becoming incarnate in the person of Jesus Christ, was something he chose to do. So that's another way in which we're like God. And we have moral agency. That means we have the capacity to do good or evil. A dog can't really do good or evil. If a dog bites you, it's just following its instincts, Its instincts might be warped because it was, born wrong or is mistreated or something. But there's really... there's really no sense in blaming a dog morally. And I don't think sometimes we might get mad at the dog for biting us, and we might even want it put down. But none of us actually think of the dog as a moral agent, and there's good reasons to think it's not a moral agent. It can't choose or not to choose. Whatever inputs you give it, you'll get an output. So we have moral agency. But another important thing is we have dominion over creation. We have dominion over creation. God gave man dominion over the world to rule it in His name, right? We're the viceroys or the governors. In an old monarchical society, the viceroy of I don't know why, but my mind is jumping to early modern Spain. So if the viceroy of Cuba was ruling Cuba in the name of the King of Spain, right? Everything he did had to be because it was the King of Spain's will. So we're God's viceroys on earth. We rule, we're supposed to rule in the name of God, and if we do things that are contrary to God's will, we fail, then we'll at one point be dethroned. Yeah.
What's something that's the church's view on sociopaths and psychopaths who don't really have the capability of feeling?
Right.
What is?
That's a really good point. Basically, what a human being is. We would say basically that in their soul they have the capacity for it. In their soul, as creations of God, they have the capacity for it. But something about their biology makes them fail to actualize the capacity, right? So a grandma who's dying of dementia. We believe that in her soul she has the capacity to remember her relatives and stuff, even though right now she can't. But we believe when she dies, that capacity is going to return. She's going to remember everyone she used to know.
Is that something like what you were saying during the service? With being able to see without seeing.
Exactly. So we believe that the soul's potentialities are actualized through the body as long as we're in it. So we believe historically that the soul can see on its own. So when your soul separates from your body, your soul will continue to see. But while it's in the body, it only uses the eyes. And if your eyes are broken, you won't be able to see unless you become like a holy saint, and then you'll be able to, see without seeing, and develop your soul in that way. But the capacities of the soul in this life are actualized by the body. So if you're a sociopath, it means there's something wrong with your body or your biology. Something happened that makes you unable to actualize the capacities of your soul. But when that sociopath dies and all the capacities of his soul become unbound from the body, he'll be able to have empathy again. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but what is what they're doing it obviously if a psychopath kills somebody, that's morally wrong, but if they don't really understand that.
What's going to happen to their souls? God will judge. He knows to what degree they're guilty or not guilty. Certainly people who are really far gone will not be judged. So, all the saints of the modern day, so the people who are really heavily schizophrenic or whatever are not going to be blameworthy for their actions.
Yesterday, in the state of South Carolina, they put to death, I think he was now 56 years old. And he murdered a man. He came to the man's house years ago, didn't know him.
Yeah.
They were total strangers. And he says, my car broke down, can you help me? But it was all set up because he wanted to kill him, take all his stuff, and go. And not only did he kill him, but he cut the man open and put up on the wall, catch me if you can. I mean, this guy is really a sad case.
Yeah.
And then he picked up two hitchhikers on the road, and when they had gone out of the truck to urinate, he shot them both in the back. So they put him to death yesterday. But you get into the whole history of his background. His mother was an alcoholic. She beat on him. His relatives had sex with him when he was a little boy.
Oh, geez.
It just goes, the horror story.
Right.
So you can't say, well, let him go. I mean, he's a danger to everybody. But on the other hand, there are extenuating circumstances to how this monster became a monster.
Right. So, you can make an argument either way. Maybe he should be locked up for life, or maybe he just needs to be executed because there's no redeeming him. But as far as that's a separate, or it can be a separate subject from moral agency. How's God going to receive his soul? I don't know. If it's true that he never had a chance, let God decide.
God is just and God is merciful.
Right. So
take it from there.
we'll see. We'll see. We'll see in the next life what happens to a person like that. So we have dominion over creation. So God gave us to rule over the earth. And by the way, this for me is extremely compelling. Like if you want to say, I think you can look around at the world as it exists and say, oh, this passage of the Bible is true. Man just has dominion over creation. We have conquered reality. We have built spaceships. I mean, not me personally, but people like me. We've built spaceships. We've built world governments. We have these telecommunications. I think that just like is the Bible in real life as we see it. I think that is very strong evidence that we're more than mere survival machines, or we're not some sort of trivial secondary species. We really do seem to be in the image of God. Why? Because we're ruling, we're conquering, and we are taking dominion. We're not using our dominion well always, because to have dominion properly means to be a good steward of creation and respect it and not to just exploit it. But nevertheless, we are sort of actualizing that mandate. And we're persons who can love. That's another thing. We are persons who can love. We depend on love. You can read about those terrible experiments in the 50s where they tried to raise infants with I think it was in the 50s. They tried to raise infants with nourishment and like everything they physically need, but without cuddling and without affection, and they all died. It was actually really tragic. But it's like something. This was back when science could just do anything. Yes.
There's actually, if a baby's not doing well, the closest they possibly can be to you is how you bring them back. Take a baby that's on death row and bring it right on back by just holding it close to somebody's skin.
Really. It's a beautiful thing, but it's also a tragic thing for the babies who've not had that chance. But yeah, I mean, there's something about these experiences with infants and other situations you can know that human beings really need love to survive. It's about more than just like, oh, it's nice to have love. But no, we really become warped or even die if the more isolated we are. Yeah.
How do we trust our own conscience? Because everybody essentially all trusts, in some sense, their own conscience and the decisions that they make. Whether we look at people who started new churches, Martin Luther was judging his conscience about understanding certain things. But it's like we understand that we know that we're not supposed to kill, commit adultery, all these things, because that comes to us within our conscience. But how much do we know of it that we can trust? Because sometimes we might have a wrong thought that we might think is true.
Right.
How are we capable of keeping up with that?
That's a really good question. And the historical answer of the church is that we trust our conscience always in conversation with our spiritual father. So we're not just on our own with our conscience, because you're right. We can get into hairy situations if we just go on our internal sense, our internal felt sense of what's right. And usually our conscience is a good guide of the world, but most of our consciences are deformed in some ways. Our consciences are a little warped. The extreme case is like the sociopath or psychopath whose conscience is totally out of whack. But for most of us, we have a general sense of what's good, but we can go wrong in certain ways. So we need to check it against our spiritual father, against our bishop, against the history of the church, if we're thinking of doing, and the teachings of the church, if we're thinking of doing anything like big in our lives. So in general, our conscience is like the first thing we trust, but not the only thing. And if our conscience is at odds with what the church teaches, then we go with what the church teaches and not our conscience. And that that's something that was personally, I mean, okay, I can give a kind of somewhat spicy example, but I used to be like, when I was first coming into the church, I was really like, this was in 2012 or whatever, so the world was a lot different back then. But I was like really like, well, why can't we just have what's called gay marriage? Yeah, why not? They love each other, right? They just little did I know that there's a whole can of worms attached to that. But I really didn't understand the church's teachings, and I felt that what the church taught was not right. But I said, okay, well, I think the church is real. I think this is what the church teaches. I'm just going to stick with it. And now I can confidently say, 13 years later, or whatever. Oh my gosh, the church is so right. Like the church was absolutely right. And the craziness that got unleashed by following what would have been my conscience at the time would have just been a disaster for civilization and for individual people in a tragic way. So I'm really, really grateful that I stuck with the church on that particular issue. So just in general, we can feel things really powerfully. And of course, in retrospect, that stuff came into me through the internet, through TV and movies, through sort of a warped vision of how things actually work versus how they actually are. But what? Propaganda. Yeah, I mean, that is the word I'd use. So anyway, our conscience can be warped, and we have to stick with the church in those cases. In the cases where what we think and feel is at odds with what the church teaches, the church wins. Okay. Man's purpose is tied to what he is. Our destiny is to realize the image of God within us and thereby be united to the Trinity in love. So what the Orthodox Church has always taught is that, Genesis says man in his pre-fallen state was created in the image and likeness of God. The image and likeness of God. Now we say after we've fallen, after Adam and Eve sinned and caused all those problems for us, we lost the likeness, but we kept the image. So certain core dimensions of our resemblance to God are still there. We still are rational agents. We still have free will. We still have moral agency. We still have dominion. And we still have the capacity and need for love. But we've lost the perfection. We've lost the omnipotence and omniscience. We've lost the goodness of God. We still have some of the goodness of God, but we're missing quite a bit of it. We're missing quite a bit of it. So we've kept the image, these sort of basic characteristics that we'll never lose. There's never going to be a time when any of us stop being rational creatures, that we stop having free will and moral agency. But we can choose to be good or not good. We can choose to resemble God in that way. We can choose to use our free will for good or not good. So we have the image, we lost the likeness. And our duty, our purpose as Christians, is to regain the likeness, is to be reformed, and to be united with the Trinity in love. We read that passage from the Gospel of John last class, but it bears repeating. Jesus Christ, when he's praying for the church, he says, he's asking the Lord that they may all be one as thou, Father, art in me and I in thee, that they also may be one in us, and that the world may believe that thou hast sent me. So our duty is to be united to one another as deeply as the Trinity is united within the Trinity, and then in that way to embody the Trinity on earth. That's the profundity and the meaning of us being made in the image of God. That's our purpose. Man is created to be in communion with other men as they also bear the image of the Trinity. And that's all people. That's all people, even the most despicable. All of the people bear that most basic likeness of God. Again, in some people it fails to be instantiated fully, like in the case of psychopaths, or like in the case of people who are severely mentally challenged. They have not fully actual, or have severe dementia or something. They're dimensions of the image of God which they fail to actualize, but they're in there kind of somewhere, and they'll be released when they die and they pass away. Man must be. We're meant to be united with all people, and failure to want that is failure to want paradise. Isn't that interesting? You're going to have to. The idea of you going to heaven means you're going to have to be up there with everyone you didn't like, potentially. Assuming they all make it there too, and you have to be ready. You have to be open in such a way that that's going to be your existence. And not to mention, man must love the world as a gift and means of communion with God. So like we said, our very existence is a gift from God. You did not decide to be called from the darkness of non-being. There's a very large amount of time where you did not exist, where I did not exist, and it could have remained that way. You were just given existence. It was just handed to you by God, and so you have to understand it as a gift. You owe it to Him. You don't owe it to yourself unless you're self-existent, unless you brought yourself into being, which of course entails a logical contradiction. So understand that He gave it to you, and usually we give gifts for a reason, right? And the reason is because He wants to use you to use this existence as a means of communion with Him, as a means to get in touch with Him and to embody the life of the Trinity. Again, this is what I love about our faith is the coherence of the story behind it. All the different pieces add up. They make sense into one unified story. God didn't have to create the world, but God is perfect love, so He wanted to share His love with other beings that are like Him. So He just keeps multiplying us, keeps creating generation of humans because He wants more like Him. He wants to expand His love infinitely and bring as many people as possible into that communion of love. But of course, love has to be free. We know that, right? If you force someone to love you, it's not love. I could create a little sock puppet. Hi, Father Theo, I love you. It doesn't actually love me. I made it. It doesn't actually love me. Why doesn't it love me? Because it's not capable of loving. It's not capable of choosing to love me. It's a construction. If God created us as a bunch of robots without the capacity to choose, we would all just be little sock puppets on God's hand. We would be forced to love Him, but it wouldn't be real love. It's kind of insane what I just said, but it's you understand. I'm sorry.
Without free agency, it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, exactly. It's just robots. It's like falling in love with your Chat GPT. Don't do it because some people do it, but it's a simulation of love.
It's nice. I mean, ChatGPT is very reassuring and comforting. That was a brilliant insight.
That's right. That's right. It's very almost slavishly so. I get a yeah.
There is a whole like community that's like dating.
Oh, I'm aware. I've scoured the dregs, and that's why. And just on one level, it's terrible for society. On another level, I love it because the more insane the world gets, the more people come to the Orthodox Church. And so I'm like, just bring it, just ramp up the craziness. Let's just yeah. So just So anyway, man's being made in the image of the Trinity is key to how we are meant to live and be fulfilled. So you need to start with this stuff. Before we go into any of the doctrines of what the church teaches, any of the other like lifestyle things about how to live as an Orthodox Christian, you need to know the basic stuff. What is the foundation of reality? It's the Trinity. What are you? You're in the image of the Trinity. This is the basic stuff that informs all of the higher level structure, all the higher level stuff on which the structure of the Orthodox Church is built. So this is why we are so sensitive about tidbits of doctrine. This is why it matters that the Catholics added one phrase to the creed. Because how you define, it's true, because how you define the most basic stuff affects all of the stuff that flows from it. And so, I can't tell you how the Filioque, how adding one small phrase to the creed created all the problems that came into the Catholic Church later on after the schism. But there's clearly some kind of connection there, right? Because the separation happened and then all these strange ideas entered in.
The Filioque was an outgrowth of the original crisis that Athanasius created.
Well, responded to.
Or however you
Yeah,
want.
not he created. He responded
Well, no,
to.
he didn't create but he interpreted Scripture within the context that made sense to him, from Proverbs and other places, and that's where he went. And so the monk, whoever that monk was, I don't think we know, in Spain, wanted to emphasize that no,
Oh yeah, it was a response to Arianism.
The Father and the Son did it together. It isn't the Father alone, and so we get.
Right. So like a lot of heresies, that particular heresy grew out of a reasonable response to the desire to preserve the church, and it became another heresy. Same with Nestorianism versus Monophysitism.
Yeah.
Some people overemphasize the unity of Christ's nature, and so the people opposing it said, no, Christ is divided, but they basically created a schizophrenic Christ. So a lot of heresies are responses to other heresies, and that's why it's important to walk the middle path, the royal path of the Orthodox Church. Okay.
It's interesting though that like the Oriental Orthodox Church has been split from like the Orthodox Church for like way longer than the Catholic Church, and yet it's a lot more similar too.
In some ways, yes. So that there's part of the reason for that is that in the 1800s they kind of rediscovered Eastern Orthodoxy and consciously brought themselves closer.
Okay.
So they were actually, in some respects, they're more far gone than the Catholics. So, for instance, the Pope of Alexandria, the previous one, Shenouda, he wrote a whole book opposing the doctrine of deification, which is our central doctrine, one of our central doctrines. He wrote a whole book about how deification is a false doctrine. It's that's what Satan. The first sin was the sin of deification because man wanted to become like God. So they're far gone. There's no hope of reunion with that element in the Coptic Church. But then there's another element of the Coptic Church represented by Matthew the Poor, who was a great ascetic figure in the Egyptian Church in recent memory, who drew themselves consciously closer to Eastern Orthodoxy because they're reading like Russian spiritual classics and stuff like that. So they have a very interesting history. Yes.
You were mentioning that thing with the Oriental Orthodox, the deification. What is that?
Deification is the doctrine, basically, that human beings are meant to become by grace what God is by nature. So our purpose in destiny is to acquire the attributes of God, right? Is to acquire to enter into God's being, to become part of the Trinity, basically, but by grace, not by nature. And that's a central belief for us, and it informs all of our spiritual practice. And he said that that's not possible. It's he advocated a view that no, human beings go to heaven, but they don't take on God's. They don't participate in the Godhead, and we said that's incorrect.
I think most Protestants would reject that as well.
Yeah.
How is that different from like what the Mormons believe about like humans? Like I just haven't like really heard.
Yeah. So it's in some ways you can draw parallels between the Mormon belief, but the Mormon belief is different in crucial ways. One, they believe that God the Father pre-existed as one of us. They believe that the Father was like what we are, which is just the rankest of rank heresies in our eyes. And also, it contradicts a lot of things in the Bible, like how can we live and move and have our being in the Father if he was what we are? But and that's and they teach that we sort of so our doctrine is that we become gods by grace, by grace. What Mormons teach is that we're basically gods by nature. It's actually so according to the Mormon doctrine, we pre-existed actually before our earthly life. We had a whole history spanning back to the whole origin of the universe. That's a very important difference. And the other important difference is I don't think the Mormons can cite examples of people who are deified. We can point to concrete people, like St. Paisius or St. Porphyrius, who actually took on some of these attributes of God. St. Porphyrius was darn near omniscient, and he lived up until the 90s. I don't know of any Mormon who is like that. So you have the living witness in the saints. That's also important. Otherwise, it's just theory. If the doctrine can't be converted to reality, then it's just theoretical. Yes.
Is theosis like why saints can intercede for us?
Yes, because they are participating in God. So they can do God things. Mary is so absorbed into what God is. She's not a God by nature, but God has, she participates in the divine nature according to 1 Peter. So she can, intercede for us. She can hear us when we call on her. She can intercede, do powerful acts. Yes.
I think that's like, I don't know, an issue I've been having a lot of trouble with is like when we say calling Mary like part of our salvation or something like that.
Yeah.
It's because God has allowed her to be like fully with Him in that sense, of like where
Right.
saints pray for us and say like help save us apart of that. That's God allowing us to fully participate in Him through love.
Right, exactly, because she's played an important role in our salvation. Now, we do reject some of the Catholic extremes, like that call Mary co-redemptrix.
Right.
She is not a co-redeemer with Christ. Christ alone redeemed us, but she played a very important role in the process that unfolded.
She intercedes
But
for us.
but importantly, we say that it could have been someone else. If she said no, it could have been someone else. So she's not. It could have been no one else but Christ, but it could have been someone else other than Mary.
Is deification also a Catholic doctrine as well?
I would say so. Yeah, I believe so. They don't emphasize it as much, I don't think. I'm not super up and up on what's going on in the modern Catholic world today, but yeah. I mean, we have 1,000 years together, and I do expect, like, the one important, interesting thing that I've thought about recently is that the Orthodox Church does tacitly acknowledge that the Pope is the Bishop of Rome. Because since the schism in 1054, we have not consecrated a new Bishop of Rome. That's not true with regards to the Coptic Church. We have our own Patriarch of Alexandria, and they have their own Patriarch of Alexandria. We believe ours is legitimate, theirs is not. We have not set up a Bishop of Rome to compete with the Pope. So I do think there's this kind of implicit tacit acknowledgement that the Catholic Church is in error, it's gone astray, but that it's still, in some sense, part of that original body, and we hope that they see the error of their ways and we get reunited. I mean, it would be desirable.
The Catholics have gotten bishops for like Constantinople, right, and like other places.
I don't know about Constantinople. They have for Alexandria and for Jerusalem.
Okay.
I don't know about Constantinople. I don't think there's a Catholic bishop of Constantinople, although I could be wrong.
The problem is, it was just a couple months ago, Leo said that there were monstrances could no longer be used because they were idolatrous. And
Whoa.
this has been going on. I mean, when Luther had his great Augsburg,
Monstrances are those
Yeah,
things
they-
that they put a piece of the Eucharist in,
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
you worship it. It's called Eucharistic adoration.
they have a parade.
So,
They'll lead
yeah.
it around, but you worship the host.
It's not something we do. I don't know any sense in which it would be categorically heretical, but God didn't make himself into bread so that we could look at him. God made himself into bread so that we could eat him. So for us, it's a bit odd, but it's
and that was just one. That was the most visible one I remember. There were two other things that he just no more.
well. I think
And
there's
they
this kind of
do-
tacit acknowledgement within the Catholic Church itself that they can kind of walk back on some things. Like they've
mistaken. I'm looking it up, and it says that he led a procession with one of those. So.
Okay. Well, we'll have to go into our
but,
sources. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Jonathan.
This is something that actually been going through my mind quite a bit. But let's just say we were to bond ourselves with Rome again, or anything like that. Would they have to change their architecture or their church structure? Is there a sense of maybe God is within those churches in the sense of His beauty? Because we can see a lot of beautiful things within their cathedrals, but obviously they don't have like the divine liturgy that we have or anything.
Right. Well, they're
close.
So here's how I view it. Here's my Father Theodore's personal view of the Catholic Church. What I'm about to tell you is not Orthodox doctrine. My view is that, when the Catholic Church separated in 1054, they still had a lot of the goodness originally, and they could have easily come back into communion. It was over time that errors crept in. So I think the older the Catholic thing, the better it is. The older the Catholic thing, the more grace there is. And things really only got severely bad around the Second Vatican Council in the 60s. So if you look at Catholic Church architecture post 1960, it's terrible, and they're not beautiful. But is God in there, and in what way? I don't know, and I won't define it. Certainly God is not physically absent anywhere. And there are a lot of really sincere Catholics who are calling on the name of Jesus and praying and doing good works in His name. I'm not going to sit here and condemn them, right? How do I define it? I just leave. I'm sort of agnostic, let's say.
Scholasticism, another movement within the Roman Catholic Church, is potentially very dreadful.
Really?
I mean, it's very precise. Especially when you read the Baltimore Catechism or one of the other, it's bing, 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 and it makes perfect sense, but it's trying to define the indefinable.
Right.
And there's no place for mystery because it can all be rational.
Right. It definitely seems from an Orthodox perspective that the Catholics have over-intellectualized their faith, and that runs into problems. Yes.
Last question.
Yeah.
What I want to know is can we acknowledge the beauty of their cathedrals?
No, you have to look at it and say it's ugly. You have to spit on it. No, of course, yeah, of course. My wife graduated from she graduated law school at Catholic University of America, and the graduation ceremony took within the basilica. Gorgeous, stunning cathedral. One of the most beautiful cathedrals, non-Orthodox cathedrals I've ever been in. Absolutely, yeah. And who are they worshiping? They're worshiping Jesus Christ. It's not like some monkey-headed god or something. Like, come on. They're problems. They're real problems, and that's why we can't be united with them. But no, no, we're not fanatics. Some people are.
A lot of the older churches are like we're Orthodox churches before they split.
Right.
Like it's just because it's all like basically all the Western. Their architecture styles are different, and there's still Western Rite parishes that do things in it looks kind of like Catholic, but it's totally.
Right, and that's another thing. There used to be more diversity of liturgies in the Orthodox Church, and there's no principle why we couldn't at least resurrect the ancient Western liturgies, which some have done, and that's why you have Western Rite parishes. There's one in Virginia at least. There's two. Two. One in Lynchburg and one. Yeah. So that's legitimate. That's legitimate. That being said, I'd be really extremely hesitant about any movement that just wanted to say do whatever you want for liturgics. Like that, just like yeah.
Regarding architecture. Why do we scrutinize three-dimensional icons? Why do we only utilize two-dimensional?
I think that's just a traditional thing. There's nothing categorically wrong with statues. It's just that they're not really part of our tradition. So you'll go to St. Isaac's Cathedral in Russia, and there's a few tasteful statues in there.
St. Isaac's is
but it was built to be a deliberately Westernizing cathedral. Yeah. So okay, you got me there.
There's nothing deeper about.
I mean, people have said, well, it's a graven image. We don't really carve images. Maybe, but a lot of that stuff was in the West pre-schism, so it's not really part of our tradition, and it's not categorically bad. But it's not something. But at the same time, we don't do it. Okay. Just like the thing we said about holding up the Eucharist for veneration that the Catholics do. in principle, that's not like heresy or anything, but we don't do that, and it is a little odd to us. Likewise, statues, we don't do them. They're a little odd to us, but they're not, Anyway, what were you saying?
The Western Rite does.
Does have statues? Okay, good to know.
I was going to ask, when you were talking about liturgies, are there any Eastern Orthodox anywhere that do liturgy of St. Mark or St. James regularly?
Yeah, in the Patriarchate of Jerusalem, some do St. James all the time, I think. I forget, yeah. But I don't know about St. Mark, yeah.
Holy Cross, right? This is Holy Cross Monastery in Boston, right?
So there's Holy Cross School of Theology in Boston, there's Holy Transfiguration Monastery in Boston, and there's Holy Cross Monastery in Wayne, West Virginia.
Okay, I don't think it was Holy Transfiguration, but I think it was like it might have been Holy Cross School. But anyways, somewhere up there in Boston, they do have a Orthodox form of the St. Mark liturgy that they do like on his.
Really?
Yeah.
I think it was the one in Boston. I saw that.
So we did it once in my school, theological school in Boston. We did the St. James once when I was there, and it was unusual. Anyway, we're back to the lesson. Okay, so we're going to read the packets. We're talking about creation today, remember? And then we ended up talking about Catholicism. It's not Catholicism class, people. So here's from the Fathers Speak. Grudging existence to none, he therefore he, God, made all things out of nothing through his own word, our Lord Jesus Christ, and of all his earthly creatures he reserved a special mercy for the race of men. Upon them, therefore, upon men who as animals were essentially impermanent, he bestowed a grace that other creatures lacked, namely the impress of his own image, a share in the reasonable being of his very word himself. So isn't that very interesting? We're kind of a halfway point between the creation and the uncreated. Not that gap could ever fully be bridged, but God is uncreated. He exists for all time and will never go out of existence. Animals are created. They exist they begin to exist at one point and they stop existing at another point. We're halfway between. We began to exist at one point, but we won't stop existing. We're part animal, part beyond. He bestowed a grace which other creatures lack, namely the impress of his own image, its share in the reasonable way being of the very word himself, so that reflecting him and themselves, becoming reasonable and expressing the mind of God, even as he does, though in limited degree, they might continue forever in the blessed and only true life of the saints in paradise. So that's a very concise statement of what we believe. And that's another term for us having a rational soul. What Aristotle said is that we have logos, we have speech, we have language, basically. That's what separates us from animals. And I have a book in my office by a paleontologist confirming that that's exactly true. Even modern scientific experiments show that animals don't have language and they don't have anything near language. They can make sounds, and that's a form of communication, but it doesn't have the syntax or recursion that language has. And it doesn't see how it doesn't appear possible to get a language out of just grunts. Anyway. In this manner, then, it is demonstrated that there is one God, the Father uncreated, invisible creator of all things, above whom there is no other God, and after whom there is no other God. God is rational, and therefore made his creation by his word. He is also spirit, so he fashioned all things by his spirit. As the prophet puts it, by the word of the Lord the heavens were established, and all the power of them by his spirit. The word establishes and gives body and substance, while the spirit gives order and form to the various powers. Saint Irenaeus of Lyon. And there's the different, persons of the Trinity acting in unison in creation. God the Father creates the plan, the Word gives body and substance, and the Spirit gives order and form. Knowing God in truth to the extent that it is possible, that this is possible, is not only incomparably better than Hellenic philosophy, but also knowing what place man has before God, alone of itself surpasses all their wisdom. For all earthly and heavenly things, man alone was created in the image of his Maker, so that he might look to him and love him, and that he might be an initiate and worshiper of God alone, and might preserve his proper beauty by faith in him and inclination and disposition towards him, that he might know that all other things which this heaven and earth bear are inferior to him and completely devoid of intelligence. St. Gregory Palamas. And it is interesting that, to this day, despite the pronouncements of, science fiction enthusiasts, nothing like life has ever been discovered on other planets, and certainly not intelligent life, despite our ability. What?
Yeah, it was yesterday or the day before. I was watching Fox, and there, the dictator, I don't know what you call it, the redactor, was interviewing a man who has been doing this research for years, and said that within the next few months, maybe a year or two, President Trump is going to get on and tell us there definitely is other life, intelligent life.
Yeah. So this is something that UFO enthusiasts have been into for
Well, yeah, I
decades.
mean, but no
they,
proof,
they, yeah, they say, I think that the idea is called disclosure or something. We thought we were getting close a few years ago when that one guy testified before Congress. You know who I'm talking about. This was a few years ago, and that was supposed to be the bombshell. But 10 years before that, you had another bombshell.
Right.
We'll keep waiting. The government, one day the government's going to disclose alien life and freak us all out. Okay, I'll believe it when I see it because it's been proposed many times before. And again, we know our faith is true for empirical reasons. So if alien life does turn out to exist, well, glory to God. It has some role in His creation. But as of right now, there does not seem to be any reason to believe that. Okay, special study, creation and evolution. Although her roots lay in Second Temple Judaism, Christ is the fulfillment of the law and the prophets. Christianity was born into a world dominated by Hellenistic thought. From the outset, the apostles and their successors had to figure out how to express the eternal truths revealed to us in Christ in a way that was intelligible to the world around them. That's what Tom was talking about. While at the same time ensuring that the dominant pagan culture did not distort the message of the gospel and the authenticity of the church's life in Christ. This is the balance for preaching that you have to do in every age. On the one hand, you have to make it relevant and understandable, and on the other level, you can't just conform to everything else. You have to keep the message distinct and unique. Each successive generation presented new opportunities and new challenges for Christians who were struggling to be in the world but not of it. In the ancient church, the primary challenges were presented by the dominant strains of Greek philosophy, especially Platonism and the various forms of materialism. Since the 17th century, the church has faced the challenge of a world increasingly dominated by the claims of modern science. Nowhere is this challenge more perceived than in regard to the question of human origins. Unfortunately, debates concerning the various theories of human evolution have taken place almost exclusively within the context of Western European Christianity, that is, non-Orthodox Christianity, and have almost always assumed the scientific project begun in the 1600s to be determinative. This has resulted in two opposing viewpoints. On the one hand, there are those who reject any theory of evolution outright on the basis of a literalistic reading of the Bible. In the 20th century, this led to mostly Protestant Christians employing science as a means to disprove Darwin and prove the biblical account of creation. On the other hand, there are those who accept some form of evolutionary explanation for human origins, but who nonetheless try and reconcile this view with the idea of a creator. On this view, evolutionary theory is not wrong, but incomplete. God indeed created the world and mankind, but He used evolutionary processes to do it. The problem is that both scientific creationism and theistic evolution are predicated on the same erroneous assumption, namely that modern empirical science is the final arbiter of truth. For the first group, science can prove that God created the earth in 6 days a few thousand years ago, as well as the veracity of biblical accounts of the flood, etc. For the second group, it is not just science as a method, but the current scientific consensus that is definitive. That being the case, they are forced to interpret the Bible in light of this consensus. This is Father Seraphim Rose, who wrote that evolutionary theory is a rival thought pattern to orthodoxy, not just another idea. In other words, Darwinian evolution or any other materialistic theory of the origin of the world is fundamentally incompatible with the Orthodox faith and must be rejected as false and dangerous to our spiritual health. Does this mean, however, that we must reject science in favor of a literalistic reading of the book of Genesis? Again, the fault lies in the way of the question is formulated. We must understand that what modern science is in order to understand its limits. Only then will we be able to understand that the study of ultimate origins lies well beyond the ken of science. Pretensions otherwise are merely borrowed finery, a metaphysical claim asserted by those who deny in principle the existence of anything beyond the material order. At the same time, we will also understand that ultimate origins is precisely what is revealed in the book of Genesis, which means beginning or origins. Modern empirical science is based entirely on the assumption that philosophical materialism, that is, the idea that reality consists exclusively of physical matter, though today we might want to say matter/energy. All of which is to say that modern science assumes a world devoid of God or of any spiritual reality. The question now becomes, is this assumption merely a working assumption, or does it stand as an absolute metaphysical doctrine? The answer to this question depends entirely on which scientist one is talking about at the time. If materialism is merely a working assumption, then it functions as a sort of bracketing mechanism. The scientist will deal only with phenomena that fall within the brackets of material reality. Obviously, any explanatory theories that are devised will be limited by the brackets as well. Understood in this way, there is no bar whatsoever to an Orthodox Christian pursuing a career in the natural sciences. A Christian chemist will seek to explain some chemical reaction entirely in terms of known or inferred chemical processes. He will not consider the possible influence of pixies or voodoo because such things fall outside the brackets. This clearly limits the sort of things the empirical scientist can study and the kinds of questions he can ask. The scientist can ask how a reaction came about, but not why. Or in the language of Aristotle, the scientist is restricted to material and efficient causes, but cannot look for final causes. On the other hand, if materialism is to be taken as a fundamental description of reality, then God is excluded as a matter of principle. There is no why to it all. The world just is, and there is no more to be said about it than that. This view, self-contradictory as it is fundamentally opposed to the Orthodox faith. There can be no question that since at least the last half of the 19th century, materialism has functioned as a metaphysical principle. As such, and as a cultural phenomenon, science functions in a way that is utterly antithetical to Orthodox Christianity. We can go beyond what Father Seraphim said. Not just evolutionary theory, but today's science itself as a social and cultural force is a rival thought pattern to orthodoxy. As Orthodox Christians, we are called to acquire the mind of Christ, which is another way of saying the mind of the Church. We do this by reading the Scriptures and the writings of the Church Fathers, by attending the services and praying the prayers of the Church, and by living in obedience to Christ's commandments. By doing this, we will gradually begin to see the world afresh. A world that was once opaque to spiritual reality becomes transparent. We begin to see reality as it really is, and not just a succession of transient material phenomena. This means that the world revealed to us in the Church, above all in the Scriptures and in the liturgy, is far more complex and profound than the one revealed by empirical science. This does not mean that science, properly understood, is bad, but merely of limited value. As such, we must resist the temptation to reduce God's revelation to us on the level of what we might otherwise expect from science or secular history. The book of Genesis is not allegory. It really, literally, if you will, is about the creation of the world and the origin of mankind. That does not mean, however, that the account of Genesis is designed to give us the same sort of information we might expect from a science text. To rummage through the Scriptures looking for scientific facts and explanations is to miss the point entirely. This is why I said that scientific creationists make the same fundamental mistake that theistic evolutionists do. The proof of orthodoxy is not to be found in the fossil record or in the ruins of a boat on top of Mount Ararat, but in the lives of the saints. That is, in the lives of those who have acquired the mind of Christ and for whom the world has become transparent to God's reality. That is the estate to which all have been called to become living proof of God's reality within our own lives. Okay, that's that little article is good as far as it goes. I'm sorry I rushed through it. I think it's a little bit imperfect. I did a whole video on YouTube about science and creation. It's like 2 hours long, so if you want to get into the real nitty-gritty of it, I've done that. But and I can answer questions here and now, some, but if you really want to wrestle with it, look at that. Yes?
To me, the supreme statement of what he's talking about, when I was in the 8th grade, I was taught that our solar system had 9 planets. The 9th planet was Pluto. If I was in school today, they would say our solar system has 8 planets. Pluto is not a planet. It's only...
Yeah. Well, that's a change of definitions but Pluto, all scientists will still tell you that Pluto is very much out there or circling the sun.
Yeah, I don't care where. I don't
yeah.
know. But reality is reality.
Right.
But it isn't anything until you interpret it.
Science is a model of reality. Yeah. So
And
before
you have to interpret something, and your interpretation is the place where it may or may not be valid. Because the next generation is going to take some of what you have and come up with something totally different.
Right. So it's important. Yeah, there's a difference between what science says and what actually is reality, right? So, continental drift, the idea that continents move and have moved away from each other, was proposed as early as the 1920s. But between the 20s and the 60s, if you went to any geologic classroom, they would say, no, the continents don't move. And it would have been true, but it wouldn't have been science at the time. Then after the 1960s, it became widely accepted, and now we all accept that the continents drift. So things can be true and not science. Things can be science and not true, but science is a modeling of reality based on the best information available. But there are issues to wrestle with. Like what do you do about this succession of ape-like skulls or whatever? So yeah, if you want to wrestle with it, I've wrestled with it, and we'll talk about that. Okay, but it's true as far as it goes. Science says the method is good. Science is a total description of reality is an overextension of the domain of science. And
I could prove that life comes from non-life. I can prove it. It was proven many centuries ago. Take a piece of meat, put it out, leave it out there, and little maggots will come out from it. It was only meat, so the meat produced the maggots. And It's
There's a clear cause and effect
scientifically
based on the
proved, right?
information available. Yeah, spontaneous generation was a
Yeah,
scientific
yeah.
theory and based on empirical observations. It wasn't just superstition. Okay. Questions for reflection. What? So basically, here's the deal. Within Orthodoxy, there's basically two strains. There's one, so you'll hear high-ranking Orthodox bishops say that the Earth was created according to the standard evolutionary timeline, Big Bang, all that stuff. You'll hear bishops say that. Our patriarch has said that. So that view is out there, and they were not excommunicated from the Orthodox Church. Virtually every saint will take what we would call every saint that we have on record who commented on creation versus evolution talked about literal six-day creation as Genesis. So take that for what you will. I lean more in that direction. But I understand that does create scientific problems, and that's why I'd like to get into the nitty-gritty of it. Not so you can choose either one, but do research and have a reason for what you say. Yes.
It's entirely possible that anything involved in evolution could have been used as a creation tool.
Yes.
But it's not an end in itself. And that's what science is trying to do. Science is trying to make itself the end all and be all of everything.
Right, and it's yes, absolutely. Science is a total description of reality would just basically be materialism, which is at odds with our faith. Okay, questions for reflection. From what did God create the world?
Nothing.
Yep. Did God have to create the world?
No.
What separates man from the rest of creation?
Ability to love.
The image of God, ability to love, rational souls, all correct. In what way is man created in the image of God?
In the likeness.
Yeah, the ability to love, rational soul, moral agency, free will, all that. What does it mean that man is a relational being?
Man needs love.
Yeah, man's created for relationships. In what way does man's relationship with God reflect the Son's eternal relationship with the Father?
Can you repeat it?
Yeah, what are you getting at here? This was, in what way does man's relationship with God reflect the Son's eternal relationship with the Father?
In many ways, Christ is the true Son of God, but we will become sons of God. And in the same way that Christ was obedient to the Father, so too we shall become obedient to the Father.
Beautiful. We are meant to become what He is. Yeah.
There's an indissoluble link between man and God, and that's Jesus Christ. And we're an extension of that.
Can man be defined as a rugged individual? No. How is man's relationship with his fellow men related to his creation in the image of God?
The image of God that we were created in is the Trinity, so we have to be in communion with each other.
Right, exactly. We have to embody the Trinity. It's like a modern philosophical concept. Think like Ayn Rand, objectivism, like a person who just kind of goes out and makes it on his own, and self-made man, self-sufficient. What is the biblical basis for the equality of the human race? That we're all made in the image of God, that life is a gift, and that we're all descended from Adam and Eve. There was in the early Enlightenment, that we've forgotten, there was this theory of polygenism that actually, people like Voltaire would criticize the Catholic Church for. Because the belief was, look, that was the age of exploration. You have Asian people, you have people from the Americas, you have black people. They're so different. Clearly, they must have descended from different evolutionary histories. Now we know that that's not true. But at the time, it seemed like empirical experience. People were ready to say that no, how can human beings come from the same parents? But now even modern science accepts the biblical view of things.
You're cherry picking when you say that, because all those differences are very real. How many eyes?
Right.
Two. How many hands?
Right.
How many legs? I mean.
Right. Well, what we would say is natural selection, right? So that's why, people with dark skin just happen to live in areas where the sun shines a lot more. It's because that was an adaptation. When we talk about creation versus evolution, it's really important to define what do you mean by evolution, because people use that word in a lot of different ways. And in this case, adaptation, natural selection, descent with modification. Yeah, some level of that did happen in human history. Some people with weak genetic deformities and whatever did die out, leaving only the people that survive. So that did happen to a certain degree. It's just not the whole story of human creation. How is man's use of the physical world related to his creation in the image of God? Yep. Beautiful. Beautiful. Okay. Lord, now let your servant depart in peace according to your word. For my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared in the presence of all people, light of revelation, the Gentiles, and glory for your people Israel. Amen. God bless you guys. Have a good day.